Look, I'm not a monster. I'm not going to tell you that there's some like magical food or a supplement or something you can do that's going to be more powerful than Ozempic for fat loss. Okay, I know Ozempic is powerful. Okay, but what I'm talking about is there are specific compounds in food, and particularly in honey that we're seeing now, that act upon the same pathway that might be smarter moves if you have a little fat to lose than, say, hopping on something like Ozempic without doing a lot of research. Now, one of the things I want to come out and say is that I feel that Ozempic we should exercise caution, because I've seen a number of people even close to me that have lost a lot of weight with it, but they've also lost significant amounts of muscle. And what's going on is that Ozempic in itself is probably not just burning muscle. That's not the point. What happens is sort of the lifestyle that comes with it. It works. It's effective for fat loss. It is. It's making a dent, and I like to see that happening. I'm not a fan of how they're going about it, but it's nice to see that it is making an impact. The problem is that it's so powerful in doing what it's doing that people don't feel the need to exercise when they take it because they're losing fat without it. So consequently, they lose muscle. Consequently, their VO2 max drops. So these other things that are factors when it comes to all-cause mortality, when it comes down to overall life expectancy. So I have concerns there. But by and large, I'm glad people are dropping the fat, but losing the muscle and having these other effects, not exactly good, not to mention the tolerance you build up with it. So I want to talk about a study that was taking a look at honey that was very, very fascinating. So we'll go ahead and we'll dive into the details there. After this video, I put a link down below for Seed. It's a daily synbiotic. What that means, it is a prebiotic and a probiotic in one capsule. When we look at GLP-1 in the first place, we have to realize that this is what's called a gut incretin. Okay, so Ozempic, GLP-1, it starts in the gut to begin with. So a healthy gut is clearly important there. So I preface this entire video with take care of your gut. That's probably the single best thing that you can do from a GLP-1 perspective naturally, right? I'm not saying that Seed is going to improve GLP-1, that's not the point, but this is an interesting way to kind of kickstart things from a gut health perspective. And that is a 25% off discount link. You will probably notice an impact pretty quick. I notice my appetite goes down when I consume it. I notice that I have more energy, I start sleeping better because the gut is important. So that link, again, 25% off Seed's Daily Synbiotic. So the main study I want to talk about was published in the journal American Clinical Nutrition. What is interesting about this study, and I've referenced it in other videos, is they took two groups and they gave them a 450 calorie breakfast with equal amounts of sugar. One group had sugar from sugar, another group had sugar from honey. Isoglucidic, meaning the same amount of glucose, same glycemic index scale. What they found is that the honey group ended up consuming significantly less throughout the rest of the day. They had lower postprandial glucose, but most importantly, they had delayed increases in ghrelin and an increase in what's called PYY. PYY is another gut incretin, extremely similar to GLP-1. PYY is a little more associated with appetite, whereas GLP-1 is a little more associated with glucose and area under the curve and just glucose modulation. The fact that ghrelin, the hunger hormone, was delayed tells us that honey has an impact, making it so that we're hungry later after a meal. So let's say, for example, you had a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast and you put a little bit of sugar in it and you got hungry 2 hours later. Hypothetically, if you put a teaspoon of honey instead of the sugar in there, you might get hungry 3 or 4 hours later. And it's a pretty profound effect, right? So when I say that honey has an Ozempic-like effect, I don't mean that it's going to be as powerful as Ozempic. I mean, we're acting along those same gut incretin pathways. But what's wild is that based upon this, we've seen pretty significant increases in fat oxidation and decreases in visceral fat accumulation in people that consume honey. And we see it in the rodent model research as well, where we can look at it more mechanistically. There was a study published in Biochemical Research where they actually gave rats honey when they were under stress. So they would induce stress and they gave them honey. And they found that it completely abolished the cortisol spike because of the reduction in oxidative stress, because of the flavonoids directly impacting inflammation, not to mention the overall just effect on the gut itself. Bottom line is it affected cortisol. Cortisol is heavily linked to visceral fat accumulation because our visceral fat has 4 times as many cortisol receptors in it as anything else in the body. So when we are stressed, our propensity to gain visceral fat is significantly higher. Well, the one thing we haven't seen a lot of literature with Ozempic is its effect on visceral fat. All right, so we don't know, we can assume that since people are losing fat when they utilize something like a GLP-1 receptor agonist, that they're probably losing some visceral fat too. But the thing is that they don't operate at the same level, right? They don't decrease or increase in parallel with each other. So just because you're losing fat doesn't mean you're losing an equal proportion of visceral fat. I have seen people, and I have seen many DEXA scans, and I had Dr. Sean O'Mara on my channel, and he was talking about this. People that have lost a lot of fat and are actually lean on the outside that still have same levels of visceral fat. So we could lose regular fat and maintain or even gain visceral fat, or lose regular fat at a high degree and lose visceral fat at a much slower degree. The point is that we don't have that evidence yet to really see a whole lot, although we can assume they're probably losing some visceral fat, not a whole bunch. So this is where I come in and I say, okay, well maybe using things like honey that increase PYY, that have an influence on GLP-1 activity, maybe this is a way for us to influence appetite a little bit more, where we don't have the negative side effects, but we also have the potential for visceral fat loss because of the antioxidants and the flavonoids that are in honey. Now, again, I'm not a monster. I'm not gonna tell you that Ozempic doesn't work. I'm not gonna tell you that it's bad, because I think that it has its application. It is efficacious. It is working and it is making a dent. But when you look at how honey impacts appetite and the prebiotic aspect of it, it is pretty darn influential. So here's a few things that I would recommend when it comes down to increasing GLP-1 naturally. 1, a prebiotic probiotic. 2, honey. 3, glucomannan fiber, so things like shirataki noodles. Okay, shirataki noodles, practically no calories, massive increase in GLP-1 simply because of the soluble nature of it. It's huge. Next, allulose. I've talked about this until I'm blue in the face. Allulose is probably, in terms of exogenous things that you can add through supplementation or through diet, probably the single most powerful thing that you could take to influence GLP-1. Now, if you combine that with honey, here's what's really interesting. Allulose can actually negate some of the blood sugar spike you would get from honey. So if you combined honey and allulose, you would have a double whammy effect. You'd have allulose impacting GLP-1 directly and reducing the glucose spike from the honey. And then you would have honey giving you the antioxidants that influence visceral fat, and you would have the increase in PYY, the other gut incretin that's associated with reduced appetite. Make no mistake that Ozempic isn't burning fat. Ozempic is influencing appetite. How do we influence appetite? We control glucose, we increase fat oxidation because that's going to satiate you more. We allow our body to go longer periods of time without food, and we give ourselves the antioxidants that we need to modulate inflammation so glucose can go lower. And we make it so that we increase these gut incretins via fiber, via things like allulose, via exercise, so that we are satiated and don't feel the need to eat all the time. As always, keep it locked here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.